everyone. West my Indian name is Big Voice that Speaks the Truth. My tupa is Unhasket, Christian Dominic, Kia Emily, Alec. My Kika, my mom is Delphine. As people were talking, I was trying to figure, what the hell am I going to say? Because I've, when I was texting with Bonnie was giving me some thoughts. And you need to understand this. I've been involved. I'm a former Kukpi of my community, a former chief. I'm a former tribal chief. I've spent 40 years of my life fighting a system that has intentionally tried to eradicate us by a law, your law. I call it legislative genocide. That's the Indian Act. It's the acts, provincial acts that exist to remove children. So I've spent my life fighting that process because it affected me personally and my brothers and sisters. Common law and that whole process is the foundation of it is the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius. If those of you that know legal stuff is, and the doctrine of discovery really is what it means to saw us as non-human, as savages. The Indian Act was embedded in law, and it became that racist legislation where they controlled us from cradle to grave. We became wards of the state. It wasn't until 1951 that our people could actually get legal representation. So think about that. That's only about 40 years ago, or 50, whatever it is. Just before, I was born just after that. So that tells you how old I am, so. Yes. So what I'm going to speak about is that impact of colonial law and how it may have been different if we had our own Secwépemc law in place, which our community has done since 1980. And it's important because when you talk of mindfulness, that connects with Secwépemc law. With colonial or common law, it's mindless. Colonial law is mindless. It is kind of innate. It just exists on paper, right? Until it's actually then enforced on a set of values that are colonial values, on a set of principles that really adhere to the concept of the doctrine of discovery. So colonial law in of itself has always been about killing our people. It really has. And I think you need to understand that. When I talk today, I'm going to say what I say because it's been my experience, and I apologize up front if I offended you. Because it's always truth before reconciliation. You need the truth. And so from that perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about what my understanding of our law is, how we connect to it, and how that impacted myself, my story. And I think it's important. I apologize to the Secwépemc people here. I don't speak Secwépemc. I just, because I was part of the Sixties Scoop. But I wanted to recognize my Opa here. I'm going to stand up. This is Kukpi7 Indigenous and his wife, Marianne. They've done a lot of work in Secwépemc, and that's the foundation of Secwépemc law, is our language. And my partner, Marlene, here, Syilx. So she's also very knowledgeable in the Syilx way of being in the Secwépemc, or the Syilx laws. Because that's, my history is both sides. I'm Secwépemc and I'm Syilx, And so I think that's important in terms of this story you're about to hear. Because when I was growing up, I grew up at a time I didn't go to residential school. And I think in many ways it's because my mom, because of what she experienced, she didn't want us to go there, so we actually moved off the reserve and lived outside of the reserve so we weren't going to be removed. So in doing that, I got to experience the public school system. And it's racist as hell when I was little, I tell you, holy, when I was six years old in grade 1, I used to have to, where the school was, we lived in town, I would have to fight my way to get home. And these grade 6 and 7-year-olds were always calling me names and wanting to beat me up. And so I get really creative about how I found my way home. But it also taught me how to fight. It's an unfortunate thing to say, but that's the public school system. And I think some of our kids in that system still experience that today, that racism. So I say that in the story because my experience is not unique. It's like a lot of our children have been through these types of situations. So in understanding that kind of a process is that when we were removed from our mom, and I was 13 years old, 12, 13 years old. And they call it the Sixties Scoop, right? They come in and scoop us up for neglect. Usually it was poverty. It wasn't neglect, it was poverty. My mom was a single mom at that time. And it's hard to explain when you have, I've got 4 brothers and 5 sisters and lots of noise right around. That's where it should be around home, right? But when I came home, because my mom was pretty smart actually, she sent me down to the States to work with her friend, because I was becoming a teenager, a little helly, and I was just raising hell, right? So she booted me out of the house and sent me to work actually. To earn money, and I brought that money back. But when I came home that summer, I was coming into the driveway and getting out of the car, first thing I noticed was how quiet it was, like just quiet. So what the hell's going on? So I walked into the house, and my mom was sitting on the bed with my younger sister. She was just over a year. And I asked my mom, what happened? She said, the welfare came and got all your brothers and sisters who are coming to get you and your sister. And I just couldn't understand as to why. She had no answer for me. So that's the application of Summit law, or the application of genocide, because it started to break up our family at that time. And the hard part for me is that I got placed in a separate home from my brothers and sisters because I'm the oldest male in our family. I'm actually the oldest, 4th oldest in the Christian family right now. 2nd oldest male. I've got 2 older sisters. Got an older uncle. But my role in our family was to, even as a 13-year-old, was to protect the family. That was what I do. That's kind of what I was brought up, was to protect the family. And here you are, I'm a child, and I thought I blamed myself for the family being torn apart. Because that's my responsibility, right? But I was a child. And so, in that process for me, what unfolded, and I think is important, is that I actually ran away from the foster placements I was in. I ran 3 or 4 times, I ran back to my mom. Literally it was like 10, 15 miles away, and I'd always find a way to get there. And every time the RCMP would show up, because they knew where I'd go, right? And they just try to hide in a 1-bedroom place, right? So that's what it was. And they'd take me back. So, in understanding that, one of the things that happened for me at 13 years old, I really sort of lost purpose. I really contemplated taking my life at 13 years old. Because everything I knew, my family, my relationship with my mom was gone. It was no longer there. It was just turf, right? And I didn't, thankfully, but I thought about it. So I was to that place of helpless and hopeless. A lot of our children go through that. They don't understand that because they blame themselves for what happened to them. So in that process, it just evolved the child welfare system, and I got into a lot of trouble. I ended up in jail actually, because I was a real hellion. I stole motorcycles, I cattle rustled, I stole weapons. I was just hell on wheels, right? I was just acting out. I was so angry. So angry. And eventually I ended up in jail. Freedom being taken away had a purpose for me. It taught me that that's not the road I wanted to go on. And so at that point, I started turning my life around. So that journey, I think, is important to understand, because that application of that law in our family destroyed us as a family. Because I didn't grow up with my brothers and sisters. I was separate from them. I don't know them. We're all older now. We kind of look at each other like strangers. It's kind of weird, actually, to think about it. We try to engage, we try to come together as a family, but it's very difficult because of the trauma we all experienced. Many different levels, right? And so, not long after that, I became involved in our community. And I was actually 23 years old, and I was elected on the council. Don't ask me why they did that to me, but they did. It was, because I was quite outspoken when I was young. I didn't understand that. I learned that much later what that was about. But in my community at that time, there were mainly older people and the young population, because the move wasn't there. So then shortly after that, then I was elected chief at 25. And in that process, as being chief of the community, I was pretty young. We were sitting around the council table, and a young mother came and approached us. Her boys were going to be apprehended by the ministry. She asked us for help. And it triggered all of us, because we all had been in the foster care system because of the Sixties Scoop. What we uncovered is our community population of 350 at the time had 100 children removed. Every family was affected by the Sixties Scoop in our community. Every family. Where we heard stories you talk about when I came home, there's no sound. Like our community was like that. There was no sound of children laughing and playing. None of that. Because when we talked about it, we asked, we thought, well, what are we going to do? So we turned to the old people, the elders, because that's what we're taught to do. We turn to the old ones and ask for advice. So we asked the old people. The old people at that time were people that were born around the turn of the century. So they knew some of the old processes that we had. And what they told us is really interesting, because we asked the question, how do we look after ourselves before they impose white law on us? And what they said, we had our own laws, we had our own courts, we had our own jails, we had our own police. We looked after ourselves. Everything that we did was done by our law. And so that's what we did. We set up a process, and ours is the only community in Canada that has, legislation for children in our community. So we think about that in that context. That here we are, we're talking about mindfulness and our law. What I know about Secwépemc law, it's verb-based. I think I heard John talk about that earlier. It's about action. It's not about, common law is really silent, and it's very innate, but it has no sort of energy. It's just written, Secwépemc law is really about doing things. I take the phrase as an example, it sounds simple, it's help each other. But it's the practice of our people. It's one of those things, it's a way of life, actually, because when we talk about help each other, whether it's in funerals, whether it's at hunting, fishing, celebrations, we come together and help each other. And it's not just a word, it's you actually do something. And I think that's what's important in the context of Secwépemc law. My son, my oldest son, his cousin's son was having problems, so they talked, and my son did just stepped in and just took his son in and looked after him until his cousin could get on his feet. And I was telling my son, you know what you're doing? You're practicing Secwépemc law. You're just doing it. And it's not like it's gone. People mistake that we as a people have lost all these things. It isn't, it's still there. It's that people have to understand what it means when you practice Indigenous law. It's right here, it's a way of life. And I heard mindfulness, and that's really what our law is about. It's really about reciprocal relationships with each other. Whether it's two-legged, in terms of the concept of how in the laws, and I've heard some of this, Kukpi7 can talk a lot about this because he's got that kind of knowledge. I respect him because he's older than me, way older. But it talks about one of the things when a life was taken in a family by another family. And this is what our people practice. They would gather that family together and talk about that. And then they would choose somebody in that other family and take their life. Think about that for a minute. That's reciprocal. You took the life of somebody in my blood, I'm going to take somebody in your blood, and it would stop right there. So you think about that in terms of practice, and that's kind of, people say, well, that's barbaric, is it? I think about all the murdered and missing women across the country. For every woman that's died, if we took a life of somebody else, would people pay attention? I say that because it's harsh in some ways, but it's true. It's reciprocal. It's a reciprocal relationship in our laws. We have a reciprocal relationship with everything. The concept of why is trying to sell and all our relatives. Everything that we know has a spirit and a purpose. And we respect that through ceremony, we respect that through offerings, and it's important. Like a rock, as an example, it's the oldest being on this earth. And we utilize that in our scalia, our sweat lodges. We honor it. And it gives us help, it helps us. It's been doing this for generations. As I stand before you today, and truly, think about it in this concept. Yes, I'm a great-grandfather. I'm a grandfather, a father, an uncle, and a brother. But more important than that, I'm the past, the present, and the future. I'm that link to 7 generations that came behind me, to the 7 generations yet to come. All of us are, and in our blood is thousands of years of knowledge that have just actually been rekindled through our Secwépemc, through the Titanium, the ceremonies. It's given, reactivated our way of life. So when you speak of these things, about law and mindfulness, it's that respect we have, reciprocal, it's a reciprocal relationship, how we respect everything. And unfortunately, common law and common practice, where you all come from, is yes, you may be Canadian, but you come from somewhere. Your people come from some part of the world, right? You haven't been here for 10,000 years. But where you come from, you had similar practices of connection to the land and to everything around you. That's the way your people lived at one time. But that's been lost. You've taken that and it's morphed into this whole concept of money and material things. You need to get back to your roots, truly your roots where you come from, as non-Indigenous people, because you do have those kind of concepts. If you research even more, people like to announce where they're from, but it would be good to start announcing what do you really believe in, what are your roots, what are your people's beliefs, what are your people's beliefs? Because that's what mindfulness is about, is who you are and where you come from, but also your relationship to yourself and to others. It's that reciprocal relationship, reciprocal accountability back and forth. So I think about that in the context of our family, and if we had Secwépemc law in place at that time, how different it would have been. I would be standing up here speaking to you in Secwépemc and Syilx Okanagan, because my mom spoke both languages. She also understood the Kukpi7 and she spoke English. 4 languages. You think about that. I just speak English. And the things that we would teach our children and the things we would know in terms of who we are would be totally different. We had our own processes in place. Because the Sixties Scoop totally fragmented our community. You think about this, the Institute of Genocide residential schools. How they destroyed the very essence of who we are as a people by waging war on our children. That's why I call it war. They waged war on our children, very purposefully. You look at all the documentation. And waging that war on our children It created that whole issue of intergenerational trauma, but also you think about it, they were like prisoners of war in terms of how they acted. Then they put us in these concentration camps called reservations. We couldn't leave from them. We couldn't go out to the land and connect with it. We couldn't go out and hunt and gather medicines. All of those things were going on at the time of the Sixties Scoop. So if you think about that, you know, I like to think, liken it to this is that, you know, I wear this reminder of the 215 over my heart. And I do that for my mom. Because my mom walked into that institution of genocide as a child. You know, I think she probably was 4, 5, 6 years old, right? But she came out of that a warrior. So people at Kukpi7, you walked in as a child, you were a warrior, when you walked out, and you maintained the language. All those things, I'm just so proud of you, you know? Just slowly, you know, my mom did that. And that's why I can stand before you today and talk the way I talk, because of what my mom did. She warriored up in that institution. And so it's important to understand that concept. If we had our own laws in place, rather than the imposition of white law on our families, because if you think about it, we wage war on a society, what a better way to destroy it than to destroy the family? To kill the Indian and the child, and to kill the child. 2021 May, when the children revealed themselves as the Congos, you may have heard of it, you may not have, but I think I'm really sure that every Indigenous purple person on Turtle Island felt it. We were all impacted because we know people that were there. We know stories, those stories that were told by our people, and our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles. We have heard those stories, so the truth is revealed. So the children have woken up the world. And in the context of law, it's really interesting because the whole process is not only, when you speak of the issue of Secwépemc law, it's a connection not only to the mind, and I think somebody spoke about this, it's the body, our emotions, but also the spirit. You know, wherever you go in Secwépemc, and those of you that don't understand Secwépemc, it's 180,000 square kilometers. It's larger than 160 countries in the world. We have 32 communities, 17 Indian bands, a population of over 20,000 people. And it spreads from the east, it goes over to Alberta on the other side of the border, up north at Quesnel, over to the Fraser River, and down into where I live, that's Leslie. And it's important to know that in the context of law, that our people protected that territory with their lives, with blood. And so wherever you go in Secwépemc, I keep telling our people this, our people have been there before. Even though you may not think that, because for thousands of years on this land, they've been to these places. We think they haven't been, but they've touched those places. So that's the part of what's important in terms of the law, is the spiritual process and how we call upon Tefkamuk, the ancestors, to come and help us. And it's what we're moving as we re-establish our way of life, our ceremonies and our songs. And this last while I've been on the mountains, in the last 10 years I've been out through Secwépemc, going onto the mountains. And what we're praying for and asking for is help for healing our people. And on those mountains, they're showing us things of what we need to do, and how we need to do it. The different altars, the altar we're setting up right now, actually. It's a dance, a healing dance, to heal the people. Because we've suffered so much, we need help. And the ancestors, the spirits come in. And it's not what we do as in the human beings, what the spirits do. We facilitate that kind of a process. And so you think about that in the context of law. You would never see anything like that in common law. because it's really an important part of who we are as a people, that spiritual essence of our connection to our ancestors. You know, our ancestors are why we do what we do, and why we've been here such a long, long time. So, if you think about Secwépemc law, and Samano specifically, and Samano and Kasal and the children and the families, is if we had that in place when what happened to me when I was a 13-year-old, there would be a whole different scope in terms of where we would be at today because of the things that happened, how we could actually work with each other. So I think that in that context, you know, today, as you're listening to me, you're kind of having all kinds of thoughts running through your head. That's why I say we talk to ourselves all the time, right? It's not necessarily good what we say, but we talk to ourselves. And you're wondering, what does this mean for me as a being, like Canadian? What does this mean for you? And I think the interesting part for me, and I've said this before, is now you kind of know the truth of what happened, and what are you going to do about it? You know, and this is a way to do it, to have these kinds of sessions, but it's got to be action-oriented. It can't be just words, you know? Because I've been, over the years, over the 40 years, I've been to thousands of conferences, meetings, and words just pour out of these people's mouths. Literally, it's like, you know? And I know that because I was one of them. As a chief, you have to really that. Right? Body's a form of chief. You just have the words are important, but it's again what you do with those words is what's really important. And as an example, we were up on the mountain and they're doing a unity ride with horses, and they wanted to know sort of the history of it. And back in 2010, our chiefs in 1910 wrote a memorial to, what's his face, Laurier in 1910. And the secretary of the group was James Tate, and he wrote this really sort of profound document that talks about relationships, that talks about our relationship with Canada and our relationship with everything and what that may look like. And so, shortly after 2010, the Kukpi of the community's chiefs got together and we developed a unity declaration. And you hear the word unity all the time, it's spoken, you know. And so, as I was up there speaking, I said, unity is just a word, it's the action you take. And that's why when doing the unity ride with the horses, getting out on to meet with the land, connecting with the land again, that creates unity. And that's really important. We did unity rides, motorcycle rides, we did things like that. It's really about, the word is one thing, it's the actual action, and that's what Secwépemc law is. It's actually action-oriented, verb-based, as somebody mentioned up here. So if you think about that in that context, you know, for yourselves, you're living under a colonial system, you're living under common law. I'll ask you to think about the Indigenous law, where you come from, and the honor and that respect you have for the land, for the water, for the animals, but most importantly to the people, to our people that live there. Because we've been living there for thousands of years. You know, people think, well, they always make this assumption we're a burden on Canada. And it's the other way around. Canada's a burden on us. You think about that, because Canada's wealth has come from our land, our resources on the backs of our ancestors through your law, your legislation. Purposely disenfranchise our people, purposely disempower our people. You know, the Indian Act did things like when our people were producing food, they made law amendments to the Indian Act where people couldn't sell the produce because they were too competitive. They made laws like that. Laws we couldn't represent, we couldn't gather in a group, we couldn't gather with more than 5 people. Things is just crazy to think about what that Indian Act has done to us. So think about that. And when you see one of our people on the streets, understand that within them is the intergenerational pain and trauma that our people have experienced because they've been so pushed aside and treated as non-human. You look at them, you know, I heard a lot of this when I was growing up. Oh, this is another drunk Indian. Forget him. He's nothing. You know, that kind of bullshit, you know? Human being, we are humans. We are human beings. We deserve to be treated with respect. Humanity. And that's what our laws are about, really. It's about humanity, the humanness in us. Humility, respect. So I think about it in that context when we talk of mindfulness. So recognize that when you see people on the streets that have been impacted by the genocide, they're not there by choice. They really aren't. And you're starting to see that more with your society, with the homelessness that's going on. The opiate crisis is happening. People are ending up on the street with nothing, and how people treat them. You may know somebody, right? That's the way our people have been treated since contact, non-human. So flip a switch, change your mind, change your thoughts. Because I've been taught that everything is created twice, first by your thoughts and then by your actions. So how you think, that's the mindfulness part. And I just hope that you understand that we've been through a tremendous amount in our lives. And I'm standing before you almost 7 decades, right? We're on 7 decades plus now. But just think, my whole life I've been fighting this. It's crazy, actually. I think about that, you know. My whole life has been dedicated to getting respect and for our people to be treated with humanity and for our children to be protected from that system. It's for the children. So I thank you for this opportunity. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to go into. We had another plan, but Bonnie suggested the second plan, so. That's the great part of having good friends like Bonnie and people that I work with. She kind of knows me. Because I've been through a tremendous amount in my life, and I'm not going to sit here and talk about all that, but everything that went on for the last 70 years has really it shaped me in terms of, like I said, I'm the past, I'm the present, I'm the future. So I transmit what I've learned to the next 7 generations. And so I hope that you can do the same at your dinner tables with your families. Take what you're learning here and take it to where it's going to make a difference. Not to any meeting, take it to where it makes a difference around your dinner tables, your kitchen tables, your breakfast tables. Have a conversation. Talk about it. You know, build some momentum behind it for your own family, because that's where things are going to change. It's when those little ones, your children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren are hearing the truth, the ugly truth of Canada. And now we can then say, well, this is what we're going to do about it. So that's the question, what are you going to do about it? Because we know what we're going to do, and what we're doing is standing up our laws, standing up our processes, our way of life again. It's not been lost, it's not been destroyed. The ancestors are showing us what to do. So what are you going to do? And I ask you to think about that, because I really do hope that you do take it to heart and take it to your families, take it to your dinner tables, your breakfast tables, and talk about it. You know, this reconciliation you're hearing about, the 215, what they've heard. Just because it's important, we're not going away. We've been here for thousands of years, and we'll probably be here for thousands more, because I got a whole different story, but I won't talk about it, but it's in the spiritual context, we're walking in prophecy right now, because what was foretold around 60 years ago, what would be happening right now. And so you're part of that. You're walking with us in this prophecy of where we're headed. And I think it's important we all understand that. So thank you for your opportunity to share this with you today. And I do hope that you do something different, Because if you do the same old thing, and I think it's Einstein said, if you keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, that's the definition of insanity. That's why government's always insane, right? They just don't have a mind, government. So thank you, Kukpi7.